Welcome to the American Institute of Architects Kansas City Chapter's Legends and Leaders program. This series highlights AIA architects and others that have helped shape our community, lead the AIA, and mentor a new generation of designers. Cindy Frewen has been a local and national leader in architecture, futurist thinking, and community service. A graduate of the University of Kansas, Cindy established a successful architectural practice including leadership in the planning of the Ilis Davis Park and Civic Mall, Kansas City Downtown Corridor Development Strategy, and other major projects. Cindy Frewen returned to KU to earn a doctorate in communication studies. She also earned a master's in futurist studies from the University of Houston, establishing herself as an expert in the field of long-term strategies for cities. Dr. Frewen served as chair and CEO of the Association of Professional Futurists and continues to provide leadership in various committees. She also consults for cities and organizations globally, giving major presentations and leading workshops on 5 continents. She serves as an instructor at the University of Houston Graduate Program in Strategic Foresight and taught design and professional practice at the University of Kansas. Cindy served on the advisory board of the School of Architecture and Design for 36 years and remains a board member of the Kansas City Design Center. She co-founded the collaboration of Women in Architecture and the Kansas City Architectural Foundation. She was awarded a Distinguished Alumnus Award from the University of Kansas School of Architecture and Design in 1997. Dr. Frewen has been active in the Kansas City community, serving on the board of the AIA Kansas City as the first woman in the board, chairing the Kansas City Architectural Foundation, and serving as vice president of the Kansas City Design Center. In 2000, she was elevated to fellow by the American Institute of Architects, the first woman in Kansas City. The Kansas City chapter of the National Association of Women Business Owners honored her with the inaugural Business Owners of the Year Award. The Association of Professional Futurists named her Leadership Award in her honor. Over the past 2 years, Cindy Frewen has been a key member of the AIA-KC team documenting our leadership through this Legends and Leaders program. Let's meet Cindy.
Hello and welcome to another installment of AIA Kansas City's Legends and Leaders series. My name is James Everard, and I am here today with Cindy Frewen.
Hi James. Cindy. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So this is a fun opportunity for us because usually I'm on the other side of the camera and you're always our wonderful interviewer. And throughout our series of interviews with fellows and other prominent AIA Kansas City members, you have been on our list but have been on the other chair. So now shoes on the other foot and we get the opportunity to talk with you.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to that.
Yes, so am I. It's going to be a good time. So like always with our questions about the series, so how did you get your beginnings to become an architect? What was your early interest in architecture?
So my start to become an architect, to decide to become an architect, is a little different than the normal Lego story. I was a really good drawer, although I didn't do Legos, but we did different kinds of building blocks back in the day, the Lincoln logs and such. But what I found out was when my brother suddenly died. I was 15, and I realized how fragile life was, and that you needed to spend it well. You needed to know what you were doing and have a purpose. And so within a week, I went and took a career aptitudes test from the counselor at Center High School here in town. And it came up that I should be an architect or a farmer. I guess both of them are very generalist and sort of making the world a better place and a whole lot of different skills, but farming sounded a little intimidating to me. 365 days a year at 4 a.m. in the morning sounded brutal. So I was very interested in architecture. My parents had built their house. It was just a raised ranch in the 1960s, but then I was there at the opening of the St. Louis Gateway Arch, and so there was some moments where architecture interfaced with me, and I loved the idea of working on bridges and cathedrals. I learned way later that we don't work on bridges, but it would have been civil engineering. But anyway, it was a big decision for me, and I kind of pursued it with a passion ever since.
So what led you into your education as an architect? What were those steps?
Kansas University was close. The benefit was my dad had just gotten a doctorate of education there. And they were public school teachers. Education was the family business, and the Missouri tuition reciprocity was in effect. So we could get in-state tuition even though we lived in Kansas City, Missouri. And so it had a lot of things that made sense. It was close, it was a good price, and it was a good school. So I went there and I was very happy with that decision. So Kansas University, I started in second year because I'd had a first year here at Longview College and when I was in high school. And so there was a number of us did that. Earl Santee and Kurt Gastinger, I think both did that perhaps. I know Earl did. And so we met at that point too. At any rate, I started in second year. Well, I landed in there in my, halter top and platform shoes in the early 70s and was a fish out of water. It was almost entirely men in my class. All my professors were men. And I was this little kid. Some of them had gone to Vietnam, and so they were older too. But lucky for me, a group of us really bonded, and we started doing traveling together. We went to the AIS, they called them the AIA student conferences in Chicago and in Tempe, Arizona, and Columbus, Indiana. And so I hadn't traveled much before that, so I got to see some of the country and see what good architecture really looked like. So my first and my last professors were kind of headaches for me. But I had Ken Wilson, I had Gaylord Richardson, Langston Trigg, Tom McCoy. These guys were brilliant. They were ahead of their time in terms of sustainability. And so I had really good influences there. I think my college career was a lot of fun.
So from graduating, what were the next steps of where you wanted to practice and how did that journey, where did you go?
I thought I would initially end up in Kansas City. There were no jobs listed. Just somebody, one guy was advertising that he'd work for free for internship hours. We had to get 3 years of internship before we could take any of the tests to get licensed. And I said, well, I can't do that. And I happened to see this article in the Wall Street Journal that said that they needed architects in Montana. There was a shortage, and so I just loaded up and went right up there. And within a day had a job in a small town and stayed there a couple of months. But I went to Missoula, Montana worked for a guy named Al Mulkey. And he did design build, and he did public work, and he did, commercial projects. I worked on a medical office building initially and a whole lot of other things while I was there. So it was a great experience, kind of a golden time, because it's nice to be somewhere where you're really wanted, where you're short on architects. They just really treat you like your royalty and listen to you. And when I came back to Kansas City, it was a little different. I only stayed up there for 3 years, but came back here, and there was still an excess of architects. And so once again, it was difficult getting a job.
Being a woman architect and coming into a competitive market that's dominated by men, how did that initial foray back into Kansas City, how did that start?
Well, the first job I could get was with Burns & McDonnell. There really weren't. At that time, there were these rolling recessions. We don't have those as much now. Back then, the OPEC nations were doing all of the countries had bonded together on oil and spiking the oil prices, and it kept throwing us into recession. And so again, I graduated, and then I came back both times in recession. And so going to a big engineering architecture firm was my best bet. A guy named Dale Nelson there hired me, and I got to work on this cool project, a 1930s Art Deco WPA building up in Brooklyn, New York. And so I was going up there every month. It was really amazing going from Montana to Kansas City to New York. It was, again, a really cool moment for me. But I only worked there for about a year and a half, and then Kurt Gastinger, who I'd met through AIA, because I think I was on the board already. And as a first woman on the board as an associate director, I was a young pup and meeting people. It was very influential for me to go there. I started working on programs committee and immediately met a lot of people. So at any rate, I was their first employee at Gastinger Reese Walker, which became now Walker, Gastinger Walker Hardin, and then just Gastinger Walker now, I think. So I was their only employee, and I was there for about a year and a half, and they ran out of work. And that's when I decided, well, maybe instead of continuing to beat my head against the wall trying to get jobs at these firms, I'll try my own. I'll try doing it myself. I was licensed and decided to see what I could do.
With someone like Kurt in your corner, What was that conversation like with being able to springboard into your own firm? What was their advice, especially as a woman architect back then?
Well, it was kind of fun because there was 3 of them and 1 of me. And so I got to see exactly what they had to go through. And Kirk had 100 applicants for his job, for the job I got. And so they were just flooded with people that wanted to have that job. And it was sad when I had to leave because it was a good relationship, a great relationship. I loved working there, but they were just out of work. I think 6 months later they got this AT&T job that they just parlayed into all kinds of work for years on end after that. But I just happened to hit that window for them. And immediately I started getting some, because of other friends, also in AIA, started getting some work in industrial and small corporate and then larger corporate work with Hallmark and AMC Theaters, both, again, people that I met through AIA. So it was actually, I hadn't yet got the benefit of being the first female architectural firm since the 1930s. Literally, I hadn't even understood that it was such a historic difference, that there hadn't been any architects starting their own firms in Kansas City for 50 years. And but Mary Rockwell Hook and Nell Peters and Elizabeth Rivard, who luckily I met about that time, I mean in the 80s. She was still alive. They all closed their shops. They closed their offices in the 1930s during the Depression, and nobody ever started again. So it was a long desert before I started. It was pretty significant later on. I could see it, but at the time I was just really trying to get work.
Right, and laying that groundwork for future women architects to be firm owners. So let's talk
and many have. In other parts of the country, there were a lot more women architects that had firms. It was just unusual in Kansas City and St. Louis.
Your travels, though, you were able to meet some of them and kind of commiserate and talk about what's it like running a practice as a female architect, a woman architect.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the women fellows that you'd meet back then, they were like gods. They were heroes, and you'd meet them at AIA meetings. We'd have meetings and I'd get a chance to meet some of those names, the people that I'd see on the fellows list.
So let's talk about Cindy Frewen Architects. What was your main push and projects that you got to work on with starting your own business?
Well, early on it was those private jobs, but pretty soon I started doing work with Parks and Rec, Kansas City, Missouri Parks and Rec, Rusty Corwin there. I went and applied for some projects. They have to advertise public notices, so I started putting together enough resume that I could get some of those jobs. I hired people at the office within 6 months, and so we were becoming a team. And we were in Hyde Park area, so I was in a carriage house, and it was pretty cozy because by the time I moved out of there 3 years later, there was just my bed left, and everything else was all architecture firm. It was small, it's a carriage house, so there's just 2 floors at any rate. So then I started doing the works with Public Works, and then on Public Works, such as Kansas City, Missouri Parks and Rec, including things like what became a real flagship job for us was the Civic Mall, the downtown Civic Mall, which was a redo of we looked at 60 blocks of downtown, and that was about probably within 10 years that I was at that level. In between, did some other public jobs like KCI parking structures, the interiors on the federal courthouse, Whitaker Federal Courthouse, which was related to Civic Mall. It was right on it. It's on Davis Park, which is what we ended up calling that park. But anyway, all of that public work in that area, City Hall, Jackson County Courthouse, and the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department were all clients for years and years, for 10 or 15 years. So,
and also, besides growing the firm, you also had a leg in teaching also still. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
When I first started the firm, of course, it was pretty hungry. There wasn't a lot of work, a lot of payment early on. You just fund it yourself until things get going. And So I also started teaching over at KU. Max Lucas was the dean at the time, and so I started teaching second year design studio along with Kent Spreckelmeyer, who we've talked with, and a couple of others that I think Glenn Leroy was the second year design studio at that time too. We had this stellar group of second year design studio people, and we were all pretty much pups still. It was early 80s, and so it was new. But they were all full-time academics. I was the one that was the adjunct coming in and doing that work. And ever since then, I've kept teaching. For the last 40 years, I've been teaching on and off somewhere most of the time, either here or at University of Houston, and either in architecture, communication studies, or future studies.
Have you found that, through teaching and also practicing, how that has merged your interest as an architect, or has it diverged them?
No, that's all. It all builds on itself because you're busy telling your philosophy of things, trying to make you see other people and what they learn, and you learn through that. I mean, students teach teachers as much as we teach them. So it was very useful that way. And plus, students are good at doing sort of this wide breadth of ideas,
Good. So through your early career, you were doing a lot of these massive, big projects, big public projects, but then you also got to do a few little jewels, some houses. So can you talk about a few of your house projects? Because once again, it's always kind of an architect's dream to do a custom house.
Well, I didn't do that many of them, but my late husband, Gene, was a builder. And so the ones that we did were usually pretty large scale houses, and one of them was Tom Watson's house out in Bucyrus, which is south of Kansas City. And it was on several hundred acres, and we built the house and then an addition to it, and then a guest house and a lake, and then another lake, and then a rifle range, and then a go-kart range, and then a stable and an arena, and it went on and on for like 15 years.
So as an architect and firm owner, you made a major career shift into strategic foresight. So can you kind of expand on that, and what was your greatest challenge with that?
When I somehow got a wild hair that I needed to do my fellows submission in 1999 so that I could be elevated in Philadelphia in 2000. I thought that would be very cool. I just jammed in the time to get that done. Frank can attest to that because he'd become a fellow the year before. And so that meant he got the benefit of managing those of us that were applying the next year. At any rate, it was mind-opening to me once I got it done and had this inch-thick binder. I think that's what you could have at that time. There's lots of rules. And you see everything you've done, and I thought, now here's what I've done. Do I want to do this another 25 years, and are we doing the right things? It really got to me to be a question of, before I was doing a project at a time, and you do it for clients, and so it's work, it's good work, but should we really be building? I started thinking more about what should we be building and why are we building it? And so there were bigger questions than what you have with clients. And that's when I was working then, I decided to merge my firm with BNIM, and we were doing a project down in Houston. I ran into this University of Houston program in strategic foresight. And so I did this intensive summer programs, and intense in summer in Houston is real. I spent 2 summer camps, you might say, down there, getting my master's from them, and then started teaching there. Have taught ever since, really. Started, I think, about a few years after I got out, because I still came back and got a PhD at KU in communication studies. At any rate, that was a big change for me, and from then on I started working with cities on the future of cities more than doing architecture work. I did architecture work while I completed my degrees, but then I started becoming full-time on foresight work.
And the foresight work has taken you around the world.
Yeah, it's very global. It's very global. So I started all five continents. I've worked on 5 different continents, from Taiwan and Johor Bahru in Malaysia and Singapore and to South America.
So did you find any commonalities through all this work at different countries on different continents?
Every city's different, and you look for patterns in terms of demographics and technology and environmental changes. And we know a lot about what climate change is doing. We even know a lot about what demographics do, because it takes generations to change what a growth of a city is going to be.
Good. So changing gears a little bit, you mentioned the AIA and being elevated to the College of Fellows. So with doing this program through KCAIA, what has AIA meant to you, and what have your biggest contributions, and what's been big important steps for you through AIA?
Those 20 years after I came back from Montana, AIA and I were married. It was a constant things going on, whether it was being on the board. I was on the board 3 different times, or chairing committees, from nominating to programs to I liked professional development things, things that were about learning and about teaching how you get through the ARE and that sort of thing. Those were interesting to me, and so I did a lot of that work for those 20 years. About somewhere in there, we started the Kansas City Architectural Foundation too, and right before I started my firm, we started a bunch of women architects started a thing called the Collaboration of Women in Architecture. And then we also, late 80s, for 1990 or so, started the Kansas City Design Center. So it was sort of this, group of different architectural organizations that were starting in the 80s that I got involved in. And so you meet a lot of people. I mean, this matters a lot to you, is the network that you build, the things that you can accomplish together, and that's all AIA.
So as we're closing, I think the biggest thing is, trying to connect to the younger younger generation of AIA members. And so what advice do you have for young architects today?
Well, James, I thought about this a lot, and I'm not going to remember any of the things I thought about because I'm sure they were just brilliant, but I'm going to have to say what comes to my mind is that I remember, it was in the Kansas City Star, so that's why it sticks with me, is that they asked for a quote or something. I said, trust yourself. Well, now I would think that is so naive, because the fact is, yes, you have to have a belief in yourself and know what you bring to the table, but you also have to know what everybody else brings to the table. All of the things that we do are collaborations. Everything that we do has to do with what we bring and what other people bring. So you have to know about who you're working with and pick those colleagues, This is one of the reasons so many of the people that we have come speak here at Legends and Leaders have been good friends of mine. They're the best. They're the best people we have in town, and I'm lucky that way. So that's one thing is, grow a network, grow friends that last for decades, because it really does matter. I should have learned earlier on, I was always an exerciser, but I wasn't a sleeper or an eater. And I learned later that these things are important too. You should take care of yourself. I started meditating early, but journaling later. And so there's things that you can do to make your life better. And you should pay attention to those things. And also that you look outside the field, because that will grow your perspective on what you build and why you build. You have to have a philosophy of architecture. You have to have a belief system to know what you're building and why you're doing it, and so that you can advise people. And so that's very critical as well. And finally, look farther out, because there's all kinds of amazing things that are, this is a century of peaks. Meaning we're having peak population, peak oil, peak urbanization, all of these things that happened through the industrial era that, did the hockey puck thing in the statistics are now coming to an end. I mean, they're changing because all kinds of reasons, but population changes and technological acceleration and climate change. These things really matter when you look further out. And it really should change what you're building today. So I think all of those things is what I'd tell a young architect.
That's very good. That's very good advice. And I'd like to say in closing, thank you for your time. And it's been great being able to be on this side of the camera with you. And once again, have another great person in my own network as a female architect, a strong female architect that has, set her career and path forward, and it's great to know being able to work with you and take this time with you. So thank you so much for your time today, Cindy.
James, you've been great. Thanks so much.
So once again, thank you for joining us for another series, another one of our wonderful interviews as part of the AIA Kansas City Legends and Leaders series. Stay tuned.
His head's bigger than mine.
All right, that's good. All right.